You can read me like a book, but you always tear the page. You can tell me how I'm supposed to feel. You know me better anyways. And you can put me...
Welcome to Webcast Wednesday. So today we're going to be talking about how to create your own webcomics. The first thing you're going to need is a premise, and generally I've found, especially with webcomics, that the premise is actually also going to determine the genre that you're going to be writing in. Is it a buddy comedy? Is it a romance? Is it a horror? Is it one-off puns? Does it follow a specific set of characters, or is it about different people in each strip? I should say that even the comics that don't follow a specific set of characters will still often fall into a wider set of characters, or at least character archetypes if they run long enough. Examples of this would be Non Sequitur, The Far Side, and more recently and probably more amazingly, Amazing Superpowers. Still, there are those comics like Cyanide and Happiness and XKCD, which don't seem to follow any set group of characters. And I say that because it's kind of hard to tell who your characters are when all of your characters are actually stick people. Now, I should say that there are some webcomics out there that don't follow any of the traditional character archetypes or comic archetypes, and don't go for the one-off puns or a revolving door of characters, but rather tend to make statements about things. Moofus Comics, for example, tends to look different every strip, and the only recurring character is the creator himself. And that's actually the beauty of webcomics too. It's because you're your own publisher, you don't have to conform to any of the traditional formats or archetypes of traditional comics. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later. Once you've established your premise, it's helpful to think about what drives your comic. Now, you may be thinking that you would want to design characters after establishing the premise, but I'm willing to bet that if you're thinking of designing a webcomic, you already have some characters in mind, and those characters aren't going anywhere. Establishing what drives your comic, i.e. what moves the story forward, will actually help you in your character planning and design, because while you may have some of the main characters imagined already, this will help you determine what types of secondary characters or supporting cast or evil antagonists you will need to help move the story forwards. Again, if you're drawing one-off puns or political satire or using a revolving door of characters, then you don't need to follow a specific storyline, and you can probably skip this step. Now, the thing that drives your comic forward doesn't actually have to be the same thing from week to week. It can change depending on where you want the narrative to go. Maybe your characters have achieved their goal already, somewhere along the way, and the driving force needs to change, and that's fine. But it still helps figuring out the original driving force before you start brainstorming it. In the case of my comic 2x2, the driving force is Sarah and myself trying to figure out life and parenthood in terms of juggling school and work and how to raise our kids. And you'll notice that this sort of ties into the premise/genre of my comic as well, which is why it's a good idea to work out the driving force before any actual character design happens. Well, let's move along to character design then, shall we? The great thing about comic strips is that you don't actually need to be a good artist to draw comics. It helps, but it's not necessary. Some of the funniest comics online, hands down, are actually just stick people or simple renderings of people. Cyanide and Happiness and XKCD are really good examples of hilarious comics that just don't focus on the visual art aspect of comicking. Amazing Superpowers is a great example of simple renderings that are clearly done by a gifted artist. The backgrounds and stuff and the shading is really cool. The truth is, when it's done right, you can actually produce emotional attachment in just about anything, regardless of what it looks like. Just like in the show Community, when Jeff Winger names his pencil Steve and then tries to break it, and everyone in the room gasps. You win this round, Steve. So it's theoretically possible to have a romantic storyline existing between two very simple shapes by just attaching vaguely human qualities to them. Watch this. The truth is, good character design doesn't really exist on the drawing end of things. It actually exists on the writing end of things. My character doesn't necessarily look like me, but he acts like me, and so he resembles me. In terms of how he looks, I actually designed him to be able to be drawn on a whiteboard or a chalkboard without having to draw any rough lines. So the glasses are the center focus of the face, and everything else is designed around the glasses. When writing characters, you don't need to stick to the traditional archetypes, but they do help. In 2x2, my character is the buffoon and Sarah is the straight man. Likewise, in Penny Arcade, Gabriel is the buffoon and Tico is the straight man. To take a different approach, in the Boondocks, Huey and Riley are yin and yang to each other. Same with the Spy vs. Spy comics, which is actually a really interesting example, because they also both play protagonist and antagonist simultaneously in each comic. You can try not writing archetypes, but I found the more I fought against them, the more I pushed the characters into different archetypes. And just because you have these archetypes doesn't mean you can't bend them. For instance, in the date night series I drew, I'm the one who wants to stay out on the date, and Sarah's the one who irrationally wants to go back and watch the baby sleep, even though it was the first time we've been out of the house in a while. To use Penny Arcade as an example again, Tico often becomes the buffoon whenever they are discussing things that he is a fanboy of and that Gabriel is not.
Up and down, well, I guess it's up to you. You can tell me